Everyone in the room thought the NDA was a leash, one neat signature away from silence. HR wore that polished smile people use when they think the ending is already written. She signed anyway, because sometimes the most dangerous word on paper is the one nobody bothered to read. By 8:12 that morning, the office already smelled like overheated coffee, printer toner, and the kind of tension that hides behind polite voices. Glass walls held everything in. Every whisper, every sharp glance, every smile that showed teeth without warmth. On the 16th floor, people liked to pretend everything was transparent. In reality, transparency was just another design choice, like chrome fixtures and mission statements framed in matte black. Mara stepped out of the elevator with her laptop bag on one shoulder and a folder tucked under her arm, moving at the same calm pace she always did. That was one of the things people misread about her. Because she never rushed, they assumed she was soft. Because she never raised her voice, they assumed she would bend. Because she listened longer than she spoke, they assumed there was nothing dangerous waiting behind the silence. They were wrong often enough that it should have become institutional knowledge by now. 2 associates from legal stopped talking when they saw her. Someone from compliance gave her a quick nod and then looked away too fast. Near the reception desk, the HR director's assistant was pretending to organize courier envelopes, though she had been holding the same stack for at least 3 minutes. It was that kind of morning, one where people kept finding small administrative tasks to do so they could stand close to the fire without admitting they were watching it burn. Mara did not stop. At the end of the corridor, the conference room was already lit. The frosted glass panel on the door said Orion in silver letters, as if naming rooms after constellations made corporate ambushes feel more elegant. Through the translucent surface, she could make out 3 seated figures and 1 standing. One of them shifted sharply, impatiently. That would be HR. She checked the time once, not because she was nervous, but because details mattered. They always did. Especially on days when everyone else was depending on momentum, tone, and pressure to do the work that language was supposed to do. Inside, the air conditioning was too cold. The table was spotless. A neat stack of papers sat exactly in front of the chair reserved for her, aligned so precisely it looked staged. Of course it was staged. Across from her sat Helena Ward from HR, immaculate as always in cream silk and controlled expressions. Beside her was Darren from Legal Operations, who had the posture of a man who wanted plausible deniability preserved in writing. At the far end was Noah Bell, VP of Strategic Development, wearing the self-satisfaction of someone who thought meetings were won before they began. And standing by the screen, one hand in his pocket, was Adrian Cole from Finance, the CFO's deputy, not yet speaking, just observing. That made Mara notice everything more carefully. "Thanks for joining us so promptly," Helena said, with that polished brightness HR professionals use when they're about to hand you something unpleasant in a tasteful font. Mara placed her bag down, sat, and folded her hands. "You marked it urgent." "We did," Noah said, "because this needs to be wrapped up today." Wrapped up, as if complexity could be folded into neat corners and filed away before lunch. Helena slid the document toward her with 2 fingers. "This is simply an updated NDA and rights clarification. Standard closeout language. You've been involved in sensitive development work, and as the project moves into final acquisition staging, we need everything aligned." Sensitive development work. That was one way to say years. Years of late nights. Years of salvaging timelines that executives publicly celebrated and privately endangered. Years of turning half-formed ideas into actual systems, frameworks, and commercial pathways, while other people collected titles large enough to cast shadows over entire departments. If work had a skeleton, Mara had usually been somewhere near the spine. She glanced at the first page but did not touch the pen lying beside it. "Close out?" she asked. Noah leaned back. "Let's not make this theatrical." A lesser sentence from a lesser man might have floated away harmlessly, but Noah always spoke like he was tossing lit matches onto polished wood just to prove he could afford the damage. Mara looked at him, calm and unreadable. "I'm not the one staging a room before 9 in the morning." For a moment, nobody moved. The kind of stillness that passes across a conference table right before someone decides whether to laugh, retreat, or double down. Helena stepped in smoothly. No one is staging anything. We're cleaning up documentation before close. That's all. Close. Clean up. Alignment. Standard. The language was dressed so well it almost passed for harmless. Almost. Mara lowered her eyes to the packet and began turning pages with measured precision. Page 1, Definitions. Page 2, Confidentiality Obligations Expanded. Page 3, Injunctive Relief. Page 4, Derivative Works. Page 5, Disclosures, Restrictions, Assignment Language. On the surface, it was all built to look familiar. The kind of familiarity that makes tired people sign too quickly. That was the trick, really. Not force. Not open threat. Fatigue. Corporate pressure rarely arrived with a scream. It arrived with track changes, urgency, and a sentence like, "This is routine." She paused for half a second at the bottom of one page, then turned to the next. Noah smiled faintly. "You'll find it's very straightforward." "That's usually when I start reading slower," Mara said. Adrian, still standing near the screen, said nothing, but he looked at Helena, and Helena noticed. Barely. A flicker. Small, but there. Mara continued. Paragraph by paragraph, the document revealed its real ambition. Not just confidentiality. Not just non-disclosure. It reached with careful fingers into adjacent territory. Concepts, methods, prototypes, supporting frameworks, commercial applications, anything developed in relation to, adjacent to, or in anticipation of company strategic initiatives. It was the kind of phrasing written by people who didn't want to argue over ownership later because they preferred to swallow the argument whole now. The room stayed quiet except for the soft turn of paper. Then she reached page 6. Her eyes stopped. Not dramatically. Not long enough for anyone impatient to spot it. Just enough. Clause 4. There it was. Small. Dense. Nested in language meant to feel technical rather than explosive. A clause about retained rights, exclusions, and pre-existing intellectual property frameworks, not expressly transferred under the agreement unless separately enumerated in an attached assignment schedule. No schedule was attached. The silence in the room shifted shape. Helena misread her pause as hesitation. "We know legal language can be tedious," she said, her tone silky with false reassurance. "But I can summarize." "No," Mara said gently, still looking at page 6. "I'm sure you can't." Now Adrian looked up fully. Noah's expression hardened a fraction. "Is there a problem?" Mara placed one fingertip lightly on the lower half of the page, exactly over NDA Clause 4, as if pinning an insect under glass. The paper did not tremble. Neither did her hand. "Not yet," she said. And that was the first moment the room stopped feeling like a meeting and started feeling like weather. Outside the glass wall, someone passed too slowly. Then another. Corporate buildings always know when a storm is forming. The air changes before the first sound does. Helena folded her hands. "This document has already been reviewed." "I'm sure it has," Mara said. That answer landed like a polished blade. Clean, reflective, impossible to argue with without touching the edge. She turned one page forward, then one page back, then forward again, checking references, definitions, internal consistency. Her face remained composed, but her mind was moving fast now, like light over broken water. Not chaotic, precise. She had seen this before. Not this exact document, not this exact play, but this species of mistake. People so eager to own everything that they failed to notice what they had excluded. And exclusions, when drafted correctly, were not gaps. They were doors. Noah exhaled through his nose. "We don't have all morning." Mara lifted her gaze at last. "Then it's fortunate I know how to read quickly." No one smiled, because now they understood something had gone off script. They just didn't know what. And uncertainty, in polished rooms like this, had a smell of its own. It smelled expensive. What Mara saw in that clause did not make her afraid. It made her curious. Because if page 6 said what she thought it said, then this meeting was no longer about pressure. It was about leverage. And leverage had a way of changing who sounded confident in the next 5 minutes. Something in Noah's jaw tightened. Something in Adrian's expression sharpened. And something in Helena's perfect posture became just a little too perfect. Mara set the document flat on the table, reached for the pen at last, and asked the most dangerous kind of question, the calm one. Who drafted the final version? No one answered immediately. That was when she knew the morning had only just begun. Helena was the first to recover, which was probably why she had survived so long in HR at this altitude. She did not answer Mara's question directly. Instead, she gave the corporate version of a silk curtain. Smooth, tasteful, designed to hide movement behind it. Legal finalized the language, she said, as they always do. That was not an answer. It was a hallway with no doors. Mara let the silence sit there between them for a moment, elegant and unpleasant. Then she uncapped the pen, not to sign, but to mark the margin beside page 6, clause 4, with one neat, deliberate line. Darren from legal operations shifted in his chair. Tiny movement, tiny sound. But in rooms like this, discomfort never stayed small for long. It expanded in the air, like ink spreading through water. Noah noticed it too. If there's some concern, he said, voice tightening around the edges. State it clearly. Mara looked up. Gladly. She turned the document slightly so the page faced the center of the table instead of just her. It was a subtle move, but it changed the geometry of the meeting. The paper was no longer something being imposed on her. It became evidence. This clause excludes pre-existing frameworks, methodologies, independently developed architectures, and non-enumerated assignment assets, unless they are listed in an attached transfer schedule, she said. There is no attached transfer schedule. Helena gave the kind of smile people use when they are trying to signal calm to a room that has already started slipping away from them. You're overreading a standard exclusion. No, Mara said. You're underreading it. That landed harder than anyone expected. Adrian, still standing near the screen, pushed away from the wall and stepped closer to the table. Not enough to intervene. Enough to hear every word without distance softening any of them. Noah leaned forward, elbows on the table now. The relaxed executive posture was gone. This agreement covers work created during your time here. Some of it, Mara replied. Everything relevant to the company. Everything you can prove was transferred, she corrected. The room went still again. Outside the glass wall, one of the associates who had been pretending not to watch suddenly found something deeply fascinating on his tablet. 2 people from strategy walked past more slowly than normal. Offices are funny that way. They can sense blood pressure through architecture. Darren cleared his throat. The intention is obvious. Mara turned to him with almost gentle curiosity. That sentence has buried more expensive mistakes than bad accounting. He looked down. Because intention was for speeches, ownership was for paper, and page 6, clause 4 had just become the heaviest object in the room. Mara slid the document back toward herself and tapped once near the lower paragraph. You used acquisition stage NDA language as a blanket instrument. That would have worked if someone had attached a valid assignment schedule identifying the specific frameworks in dispute. You didn't, which means this document protects confidentiality. Yes, but it does not magically transfer unlisted underlying architecture just because HR wants a cleaner ending. Noah gave a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. It sounded like a glass cracking somewhere far away. You're talking as if you built the core system alone. Mara met his eyes. I'm talking as if words still mean what they mean. That was the problem with certain executives. They spent so much time around deference that eventually they started mistaking it for gravity. They thought things fell because they spoke. They forgot language has its own laws. Helena straightened the top sheet of the packet, though it was already perfectly aligned. A tell. Small. Almost beautiful in its desperation. "Mara," she said, dropping into the warm professional tone now, the one meant to reframe pressure as concern. "No one is trying to take anything unfairly. We are simply documenting the company's rights before close." Before close. Again that phrase. As if repetition could make a weak bridge carry more weight. Mara leaned back, studying Helena with calm concentration. Then why was this sent as urgent signature-only review? Why was there no red line? Why was I told this would wrap everything up today before finance signed off on the dependency review? For the first time, Adrian spoke. "Dependency review?" he said. It was only 3 syllables and a question mark, but the room reacted as if a window had opened. Noah answered too quickly. "That's separate." Mara turned her head slightly toward Adrian. "Not if the asset chain touches commercial continuity." Adrian's expression changed, not dramatically. Just enough. A sharpened focus, a quiet recalculation. He had been observing before. Now he was processing. Noah saw it and pushed harder. "Let's not inflate this into a control issue." Mara's eyes returned to page 6. "You already did that when you drafted around ownership instead of confirming it." Darren inhaled slowly. Helena kept her posture immaculate. Noah looked like he wanted to rip the claws out of the document with his bare hands and force reality to cooperate. But paper is cruel that way. Once printed, it becomes the most honest person in the room. Mara closed the packet, not with force, but with finality. The soft slap of paper against paper seemed louder than it should have been. "Let me make this simple," she said. "If I sign this as written, I confirm confidentiality obligations. Fine. But Clause 4 preserves any pre-existing, independently developed, or not specifically assigned frameworks that are not listed in an attachment. There is no attachment, which means the company cannot use this NDA as proof that it owns the underlying structure I built before formal integration unless there is separate executed assignment documentation." Adrian was no longer pretending to be neutral furniture. "What structure?" he asked. That question changed the temperature. Noah turned sharply. "Adrian." But Mara answered first. "The predictive escalation logic behind the vendor risk reconciliation model," she said. "The framework later used inside Orion's deployment chain." Now even Helena lost the smile. Because names have power. Real names. Specific ones. Not phrases like strategic asset or proprietary workflow. Once you name the thing, everyone in the room has to stop hiding behind abstraction and decide whether they are confused, guilty, or late. Adrian frowned. "That model sits inside the integration roadmap tied to the close." "Yes," Mara said, "and finance assumes it's a company-controlled dependency." Mara held his gaze. "Finance assumes many elegant things when documentation is incomplete." The silence that followed was not ordinary silence. It was the kind that arrives when several expensive people simultaneously realize they may have been walking across decorative flooring laid over a sinkhole. Noah stood up. "This is absurd." "No," Mara said quietly. "Absurd is trying to sweep IP chain of title into an HR packet." His face changed color just slightly. Not enough for drama. Enough for truth. Helena tried once more, now careful, now measured in a completely different way. "To be clear, are you refusing to sign?" Mara looked at the pen in her hand, then at page 6, then at Helena. "No," she said, and signed. The sound of Noah's breath catching was almost invisible, but it was there. Helena blinked. Darren stared. Adrian did not move at all. Mara set the pen down neatly beside the packet and slid the signed document across the polished table. Her expression remained unreadable, but there was something new in the room now. Something sharp, bright, and irreversible. She had not yielded. She had documented the battlefield. Noah grabbed the agreement first, as if possession could restore control. "Good," he said, too fast. Then we're done here. Mara rose slowly, took her folder, and stood with the composed ease of someone leaving a room that still hadn't understood what had happened inside it. Not quite, she said. Adrian's phone vibrated. He glanced down. Then again, more carefully. His jaw tightened. On the screen was a finance alert tied to the morning dependency review. An internal escalation request triggered by a contract-linked exception in acquisition support documentation. Orion deployment chain. Ownership variance. Immediate review required. Page 6. Clause 4 had traveled faster than Noah's confidence. Adrian lifted his eyes from the phone to Mara. What exactly? He asked, voice now stripped of all polite cushioning. Did the company just fail to own? Noah turned. Helena froze. And Mara, with one hand on the back of her chair and the whole cold room leaning unconsciously toward her answer, understood that the meeting had finally become honest. She gave the faintest, most devastating almost smile. Then the conference room door opened. If you've ever watched someone in a polished office smile like they already owned the ending, hit subscribe. Because this story is exactly where confidence starts to crack. And tell me in the comments. At that moment, did you think she signed because she lost? Or because she saw something no one else in that room had noticed? The door did not open dramatically. No gust of urgency. No theatrical interruption. Just a clean mechanical swing, a soft click, and the arrival of someone who did not need to raise her voice to alter the oxygen in the room. Evelyn Shaw stepped inside with a tablet in one hand and reading glasses in the other. CFO. Precise, composed, and famously allergic to surprises packaged as minor documentation issues. She wore midnight blue, carried herself like a line item no one could manipulate, and had the particular stillness of people who had spent years watching expensive men confuse momentum with competence. Nobody spoke for half a second. Then everyone tried to look like they had been entirely reasonable all morning. It was almost touching. Evelyn's gaze moved once around the room, collecting posture, faces, paper positions, and silence. She did not ask what was happening immediately. People at her level rarely needed the first answer. The room usually confessed before then. Adrian was the first to break formation. Finance triggered an ownership variance review tied to the Orion deployment chain. Evelyn looked at him. Why? Noah stepped in before anyone else could. A language issue. Minor interpretation problem. We're handling it. Evelyn turned to Mara. That was the whole mistake, right there, laid bare under fluorescent restraint. Noah still believed control belonged to the person speaking fastest. Evelyn, by contrast, understood that truth often sat in the quietest chair. Mara, she said. No embellishment. No corporate frosting. Just a name and an invitation. Mara remained standing beside her chair, one hand resting lightly on the leather backrest. The NDA they asked me to sign includes a retained rights exclusion on page 6, clause 4. It preserves pre-existing and non-enumerated frameworks unless separately transferred in an attached schedule. No such schedule is attached. Finance appears to have assumed the underlying escalation model within Orion was covered. This document does not establish that. Helena inhaled softly through her nose, the sound of a woman realizing every polished sentence she had prepared was about to be weighed on a different scale. Evelyn held out her hand. Noah hesitated for one fatal second before passing her the signed packet. That hesitation said more than any memo ever could. Evelyn read standing up. No one sat. Not because they were told not to, but because authority has gravity, and everyone in the room had just been pulled into its field. Her eyes moved down page 6 with maddening calm, slower than Noah wanted, faster than Helena feared, exactly at the speed truth prefers. The conference room was silent except for the faint hum of the air vents and the faraway murmur of office life outside the glass. Somewhere down the corridor, a printer started, then stopped. A phone rang once and was immediately muted. The building itself seemed to understand this was not the moment for unnecessary noise. Evelyn reached clause 4, paused. read it again, then lifted her eyes to Darren. Who cleared this language? Darren's throat moved before his voice did. Legal operations processed the final draft based on template precedent for acquisition stage confidentiality. That is not what I asked. The sentence was not loud. It did not need to be. It fell with the cold elegance of a steel ruler laid flat on a desk. Darren swallowed. The final review came through cross-functional routing. Names, Evelyn said. Noah stepped in again, smile thin and controlled. Evelyn, with respect, this is becoming disproportionate. We're talking about an NDA, not a transfer failure. She turned to him with the kind of stillness that made people wish they had spoken less 3 minutes earlier. We are talking, she said, about a dependency embedded in a live commercial pathway associated with close readiness. If chain of title is assumed and not documented, then this is not an HR cleanup issue. It is a finance, legal, and transaction integrity issue. There it was. The room changed shape around the words. HR cleanup issue. Transaction integrity issue. One was neat, administrative, forgettable. The other had board-level consequences and the power to turn polished confidence into calendar invitations marked urgent. Helena folded her hands tighter on the table. There may be parallel documentation. Mara glanced at her almost sympathetically. Then this would have been a much shorter meeting. Adrian looked down at his phone again, scanning the escalation notice. The review references model dependency risk in revenue forecasting continuity and vendor event prioritization. Evelyn did not look away from page 6. And finance has been representing that as controlled? Adrian answered carefully now. As integrated, yes. Integrated. Another elegant word. Useful. Flexible. Slightly dishonest when left unattended. Evelyn set the document on the table and tapped once beside Clause 4 with the edge of her glasses. Integrated is not the same as owned. Noah opened his mouth, then seemed to think better of the version of himself that was about to appear. He shifted tactics. No one is disputing Mara's contribution, he said. But the framework was operationalized here, under company resources, inside company systems. We all know how these things work. Mara met his eyes. That sentence usually appears right before someone discovers they do not, in fact, know how these things work. Adrian looked away, and if it had been anyone else, it might have passed unnoticed. But in rooms under pressure, eye movement becomes a language of its own. Adrian had stopped defending the process. Now he was measuring fallout. Evelyn turned another page, then back again, confirming internal references. Was there ever a specific assignment schedule prepared for the Orion escalation model? Silence. Noah glanced toward Darren. Darren glanced toward Helena. Helena glanced nowhere at all, which was answer enough. Mara said nothing. She did not need to. Silence was finally billing by the hour. Evelyn removed her glasses, folded them once, and placed them on the table with such controlled precision that the tiny sound felt louder than Noah's earlier objections. So, she said, finance relied on a controlled asset assumption during close preparation. HR attempted to finalize documentation using a template that preserved non-enumerated retained rights. Legal routing failed to reconcile the contradiction. And the person whose signature was supposed to wrap this up was apparently the only one in the room who read page 6 properly. Noah's jaw flexed. That is an unfair characterization. No, Evelyn replied. It is a merciful one. That one hit. Not because it was cruel, because it was clean. Outside the glass wall, the corridor had grown discreetly busier. 2 directors passed with the alert, blank expressions of people pretending not to notice a high-altitude malfunction. An analyst stopped near the corner planter, checked the same email twice, and then walked away much too slowly. In most offices, gossip spreads by voice. In executive corridors, it spreads by speed of footsteps. Helena tried a softer angle. Evelyn, perhaps we should move this offline and avoid overcomplicating what may simply be incomplete paperwork. Evelyn turned her head slightly. Incomplete paperwork attached to a core dependency and an acquisition path is the corporate equivalent of discovering the floor was decorative. For the first time all morning, Adrian almost smiled. Almost. Noah did not. "This can still be resolved internally," he said. "There is no need to make this larger than it is." Mara spoke before Evelyn could answer. Her voice was even, conversational, almost warm, which somehow made it sharper. It became larger than it is the moment someone decided an NDA could do the work of a proper assignment. Noah looked at her like he wanted the room to remember hierarchy. But hierarchy was a chandelier, impressive until the wiring failed. Evelyn shifted her attention fully to Mara now. When was the underlying framework first built? There it was. The real question. Not ego, not theater. Timeline. Mara answered without hesitation. Initial architecture was developed independently before formal deployment integration. Expanded later in collaboration with internal teams once Orion adopted the logic path. Evelyn nodded once. Documented? Yes. Noah's head turned sharply. Documented where? Mara looked at him for a beat too long. In the sort of places people usually check before scheduling an urgent signature meeting. Helena's composure thinned by another invisible layer. Adrian lowered his phone. If that timeline is supported, then finance's dependency mapping needs immediate correction. Evelyn gave him a glance that meant proceed. Adrian stepped out into the corridor without another word, already dialing someone from transaction support. The room felt colder after he left. Funny how that works. The moment one person leaves to verify facts, everyone remaining has to sit with themselves. Evelyn kept the NDA in front of her. Noah, who instructed HR to use this packet? His answer came a fraction too slow. It was a coordinated administrative step. That is not a person. He said nothing. Evelyn waited. And waiting, when done correctly, is more destabilizing than accusation. It gives people room to hear their own evasion echo back at them. Finally, Noah said, "I authorized acceleration." Helena closed her eyes once, briefly, a blink that lasted just a touch too long. Evelyn nodded. "Without confirming ownership alignment with finance or legal?" "We had every reason to believe." "No," she said. "You had appetite to believe." The line sat in the room like a blade laid across velvet. Mara looked at the city through the glass for a second. Afternoon light had not fully arrived yet, but the skyline was waking into silver. The towers outside looked like they were built from certainty. Inside, certainty was proving to be made of much cheaper materials. Evelyn gathered the papers into a clean stack. "This document is now under review," she said. "No downstream representation regarding ownership of the referenced framework is to be made until chain of title is verified. Finance will suspend assumption language and dependency summaries effective immediately." Noah's face went still, and in some ways that was more revealing than anger would have been. "Suspend?" he repeated. "You're freezing close support over one clause?" Evelyn looked at him the way surgeons look at infections. "I am preventing finance from lying elegantly." Nobody spoke after that. Because there are sentences that end arguments, and then there are sentences that expose them. Helena reached for the water glass in front of her, then seemed to remember her hand might shake and stopped halfway. Darren stared at the tabletop as if the wood grain might offer some precedent. Somewhere in the hall, Adrian's voice drifted faintly through the glass. Controlled, clipped, already moving consequences into motion. Mara remained standing, composed and almost detached, but not cold. Never cold. There was something alive in her restraint, something like the still surface of deep water. She had not come into the room looking for revenge. That was what made it worse for them. She had simply refused to help them falsify comfort. And that refusal had started pulling threads from everything. Evelyn turned to her once more. "Do you have supporting materials?" "Yes." "Good," Evelyn said. "Do not send them to anyone in this room yet." Noah bristled. That's unnecessary. Evelyn did not even look at him. No, that is discipline. The silence that followed felt different now. Not panicked, directed. The kind of silence that arrives after a machine has been switched from display mode to diagnostic mode. The lights are still on. The system is still running. But now every hidden fault is being measured. Mara picked up her folder. Helena finally spoke, voice thinner than before, still trying to salvage polish from a collapsing setup. I think it would be best if everyone took a breath. Mara looked at her with the faintest trace of irony. I think everyone already did, she said. That's why the room changed. Then Adrian reappeared at the door, phone in hand, face now set with the clean severity of confirmed information. He did not step fully inside. He did not need to. Evelyn, he said, you'll want to see what the dependency report calls foundational internal property. And just like that, the air in Orion became even more expensive. Adrian stayed at the doorway like a man delivering weather nobody wanted attached to their name. In his hand, the phone screen cast a pale rectangle of light across his knuckles. On it was the kind of language executives rely on when they want certainty to sound technical. Foundational internal property, exclusive operational dependency, embedded commercialization layer. Beautiful phrases, expensive phrases, the sort of phrases that look solid right up until one missing document turns them into decorative fiction. Evelyn held out her hand again. Adrian crossed the room and passed her the device without ceremony. No one tried to speak over the movement. No one wanted to be the first voice after that phrase. Foundational internal property. Mara could almost feel the sentence hanging over the table like a chandelier with a crack in the chain. Evelyn read in silence, her expression flattening into something more dangerous than anger. Anger was visible. This was accounting-level displeasure. The cold recognition that someone, somewhere, had built assumptions into numbers, numbers into summaries, and summaries into confidence. In most companies, ego caused the first mistake. But it was formatting that let the mistake travel. Noah stood very still. Too still. The stillness of a man trying not to look like he was rehearsing explanations in real time. Helena reached for professionalism again like a person reaching for a coat in a fire. That terminology may simply reflect internal shorthand. Evelyn looked up from the screen. Then your shorthand is capable of misrepresentation. Helena's lips pressed together. Darren finally spoke, voice cautious now, stripped of template authority. To be fair, dependency reports are not title instruments. No, Mara said, but they become dangerous when people start treating them like proof. Adrian glanced toward her, not with surprise now, but with the grim respect people reserve for whoever noticed the gas leak before someone lit a match. Evelyn placed the phone face down on the table. Who wrote this line? Adrian answered. Transaction support assembled the report, but the ownership characterization was imported from the strategic integration memo. Noah moved immediately, which was based on the operating assumption that all Orion critical logic developed under company direction belonged to the company. Mara turned her head slightly. Assumption is doing an impressive amount of unpaid labor in this building. Even Adrian looked away to hide the reaction. Noah didn't. He was done pretending this was administrative. The Polish had begun to peel from him in thin, elegant strips. Let's stop performing for the room, he said. Whatever version of this framework existed before formal integration, it was refined here, funded here, commercialized here, and embedded here. No court, no board, and no buyer is going to separate those realities with tweezers. Mara met his stare with calm that bordered on surgical. Reality is exactly what gets separated with tweezers when the paperwork is weak. That landed harder than the others because everyone knew it was true. Corporate mythology loves the big picture. Deals, vision, synergy, transformation. But when something goes wrong, the postmortem is always microscopic. A date, a clause, a version number, a missing attachment. Empires get shaken by details so small they look embarrassing on slides. Evelyn turned back to Mara. Supporting materials. How clean is the trail? Cleaner than this room, Mara said. There was no smile in it, just fact. She opened her folder at last. Inside were printouts, a slim notebook, and a tabbed set of dated reference pages. Not dramatic, not flashy. No dramatic reveal, no triumphant flourish. Just documentation arranged by someone who understood that when people with titles panic, paper should not. She set 3 sheets on the table. One is the early architecture summary, she said, time-stamped before internal deployment. One is a workshop note showing the later adaptation path after Orion requested integration. The third is a cross-reference showing where the predictive escalation layer was embedded into the company workflow, without a standalone assignment schedule. Darren leaned forward despite himself. Helena did too, though she tried to make it look accidental. Noah stayed upright, arms crossed now, as if posture alone could refuse evidence entry into the meeting. Evelyn reviewed the first page. Her eyes moved once over the top line and then back again. Date confirmed? She asked. Yes, Mara said. Original storage log and external draft reference can verify it. Adrian exhaled slowly. The room heard it, because that breath meant something had just shifted from possible issue to document-supported exposure. Noah took a step toward the table. These are internal work papers, not dispositive records. Mara looked at him. Then you'll be relieved to know I didn't bring the dispositive records into an ambush meeting. The sentence slipped in so cleanly that it took a second for the damage to register. Helena's eyes lifted. Meaning what exactly? Mara turned another page and laid it down with deliberate care. Meaning I came prepared to identify the problem, not solve it for whoever created it. For the first time all morning, no one tried to interrupt her. That was the strange thing about power in rooms like Orion. People imagine it lives in volume, rank, and meeting invites. But the real version, the one that changes temperature, often appears when someone realizes they are no longer required to rescue the people pressuring them. Evelyn studied the second document. This workshop note references external origin logic adapted for enterprise routing. Who used that phrase? Product architecture, Mara said, before the language was cleaned up for executive summaries. Adrian gave a short, humorless nod. Of course it had been cleaned up. That was what companies did when facts made people uncomfortable. They sent them through vocabulary until accountability came out softer. Noah uncrossed his arms. External origin could mean anything. Consultants, vendors, prototypes, exploratory materials. Exactly, Mara said, which is why any competent ownership claim would have required a proper assignment package instead of a rushed NDA with decorative confidence. Evelyn set down the second page and took the third. This one changed her expression. Not visibly to an outsider, perhaps, but everyone in that room could read the shift now. She had found the dangerous bridge, the place where wording from one process had quietly migrated into another until uncertainty began dressing itself like fact. The cross-reference mapped the escalation model through internal systems, naming the logic path, the routing layer, and the forecasting dependency chain. One note in the margin, small, almost forgettable, identified the core escalation pattern as legacy source framework adapted for Orion use. Legacy source framework. 3 plain words. Enough to ruin someone's month. Evelyn looked up at Adrian. Was this line disclosed in the close summaries? No, he said. Why? It appears the integration abstracts use the later language only. Later language, again with the cleaning, again with the polishing, again with the fatal instinct to replace precision with confidence and hope nobody opened the older drawer. Noah's voice hardened. We are spiraling around labels. The company operationalized the asset. That is what matters. Evelyn's gaze cut to him. That matters to value. Ownership matters to reality. And there it was again. The quiet violence of clarity. Helena shifted in her seat. May I suggest we route this through Privilege immediately? Mara answered before Evelyn could. Privilege won't retroactively attach the missing schedule. Helena turned to her, polite expression cracking at the edges. You seem very comfortable turning a documentation gap into a governance event. Mara held her eyes. I'm comfortable refusing to pretend the gap isn't load-bearing. Outside the glass wall, the corridor had gone strangely disciplined. Fewer people hovered now, which meant the news had moved beyond curiosity and into internal messaging. Once that happened, the building changed its behavior. Doors closed more gently. Assistants typed faster. Calendars started bleeding red. Adrian's phone buzzed again. He checked it and looked immediately to Evelyn. Transaction support is asking whether the dependency statement should be withdrawn from the 2:30 review packet. Noah turned. No. Evelyn said, yes. The two words hit each other in the middle of the room and hung there like crossing blades. Nobody breathed. Then Evelyn stood straighter, not visibly more imposing, just more final. Withdraw it, she said. Replace it with pending verification language, effective now. Adrian nodded once and started typing. Noah's restraint finally splintered. Do you understand what that signal sends? Evelyn did not blink. Yes. Do you? That silence was uglier than the earlier ones, because now the problem had crossed a line. It was no longer theoretical, no longer confined to paper and interpretation. It had entered process. It had touched a live review packet, which meant the issue now had timestamps, recipients, and a growing audience with zero sentimental attachment to anyone's career. Mara closed her folder halfway but kept one hand resting on it. She did not look triumphant. That would have been vulgar. She looked like someone who had watched a locked door quietly open and had no intention of pretending it was still a wall. Evelyn gathered the 3 documents into a separate stack from the NDA. A small act, but symbolic in the way serious people make symbolism look administrative. These will be reviewed under controlled circulation, she said. No summary language, no reinterpretation, no verbal smoothing. Source documents only. Darren nodded too quickly. Helena said nothing. Noah laughed once under his breath, sharp and joyless. So this is where we are now? We halt momentum because one employee wants to litigate nuance? Mara tilted her head. You keep calling it nuance because structural error sounds bad in hallways. Adrian stopped typing for half a second. Helena looked down. And Evelyn, cold, precise Evelyn, actually let the faintest edge of approval enter her face before it disappeared again. Another message arrived on Adrian's phone. This time, when he read it, his expression changed in a way no one could professionally smooth over. Evelyn noticed immediately. What is it? He looked up. Records found an earlier reference, he said. There's a pre-integration archive note attached to the first Orion adaptation request. Noah went still again. Too still. Adrian swallowed once. It includes a line item I don't think anyone here is going to enjoy. The room tightened. Evelyn held out her hand, but Adrian didn't pass the phone right away. He looked at Mara first, and in that tiny pause, brief as a blink, sharp as a pin, everyone understood the next document was not going to clarify the problem. It was going to name it. Adrian crossed the room like the floor had changed under him. That was the thing about certain messages. They did not arrive loudly. They arrived with a screen glow, a clipped-in hail, and the sudden realization that whatever story the room had been telling itself was about to be replaced by a dated record with absolutely no interest in anyone's rank. He handed the phone to Evelyn. No one spoke while she read. Outside the glass, the city kept shining in polished silver, indifferent and expensive. Inside Orion, the conference room had taken on that strange suspended feeling found only in places where careers are still standing but no longer attached to stable foundations. The air was cold enough to make every breath feel slightly metallic. Evelyn's eyes moved once across the screen, then back, then lower. When she finally lifted her gaze, it was not dramatic. No flare of anger, no raised voice. Just the unnervingly controlled expression of someone who had gone past surprise and arrived at arithmetic. "What does it say?" Noah asked. His tone aimed for impatient authority. It landed somewhere much closer to strain. Evelyn did not answer him immediately. She turned the phone so the screen faced the table and read aloud with the calm precision of a blade being drawn from velvet. Pre-integration source framework supplied by M. Vale for Orion adaptation review. Ownership transfer pending separate assignment documentation. Use approved for evaluation and internal deployment design only. No one moved. The sentence did not sound explosive. That was the cruelty of it. It sounded administrative. Clean. Boring even. And yet it dropped into the room like a piano wire. Ownership transfer pending. Separate assignment documentation. Use approved for evaluation. Noah stared at the screen as if disbelief might revise the wording in real time. Helena's hand finally did shake when she reached for the water glass. Just slightly. But enough. Darren looked like a man mentally walking backward through every email he had ever ignored. Mara said nothing. She did not need to. The archive note was doing her speaking now, and it had the superior advantage of being written before anyone in this room needed it to be true. Adrian broke the silence first. There's a metadata trail attached. Original archive stamp predates full integration by months. Evelyn set the phone down beside the NDA. On one side of the table, page 6, clause 4. On the other, the archive note. Between them lay the carcass of everyone's favorite corporate superstition, that if enough departments repeat an assumption, it eventually hardens into ownership. It does not. It only gets prettier before it breaks. Noah found his voice again, though it came back thinner. This still doesn't resolve operational reality. The model was embedded, scaled, and monetized here. Mara looked at him with the same calm she had walked in with that morning, though now it felt different. Less like restraint, more like weather that had finally reached the coast. Operational reality, she said, is what happened after adoption. Ownership reality is what existed before it. Evelyn nodded once. Noah turned to her. Surely we are not treating a planning note as dispositive. No, Evelyn said. We are treating it as something far more dangerous. He frowned. Which is? Contemporaneous. That one landed. Because contemporaneous records do not care what sounds reasonable later. They capture what people knew before incentives changed costumes. Helena tried one final soft approach, her voice careful now, almost fragile under the polish. Then perhaps the practical solution is immediate negotiation. Quietly, internally, without widening the issue. Mara's eyes shifted to her. Not cruel, not triumphant, just clear. You tried quietly, she said. That's how this room happened. The sentence settled over the table with devastating grace. Helena looked away first. Adrian checked another incoming message and spoke without looking up. Transaction support has already flagged the dependency language for correction. The 230 packet is being redrafted. Council wants source documents within the hour. Noah's jaw hardened. This is becoming absurdly procedural. Evelyn turned to him. That is what accountability looks like when nobody stops it early. Then she gathered the two documents again, the NDA and the archive note, and placed them side by side with deliberate care. Let's be precise, she said. The company may possess deployment history, internal adaptation layers, and commercial dependency. What it cannot currently substantiate is ownership of the underlying pre-integration framework. And until that is substantiated, no one represents otherwise. Not in finance, not in HR, not in strategy materials, not in transaction language. Every word landed like a door locking. Noah stepped forward. You're handing leverage to an employee in the middle of close preparation. Mara answered before Evelyn could. No, you handed it to me when you tried to paper over a missing assignment with an NDA. That was the line that split the morning cleanly in two. Before it, they had still been pretending this was about interpretation. After it, everyone in the room understood it was about conduct. Darren exhaled slowly, almost like surrender. There should have been a separate schedule. Yes, Evelyn said. There should have been title confirmation before integration summaries, Adrian added from the doorway. Yes, Evelyn said again. Helena closed her folder, though she had not taken a single useful note all meeting. Then what happens now? Evelyn looked at Mara. Not past her. Not around her. At her. That, Evelyn said, depends on whether Ms. Vale is interested in discussing actual terms with actual documentation. The room went still in a new way then. Not fearful. Honest. For the first time all morning, no one was trying to corner her, rush her, soften language around her, or escort her politely toward a signature that would save other people from consequences. The choreography had collapsed. Titles were still on the table, but they had lost some of their lighting. Mara rested her hand on the closed folder. The leather chair, the glass walls, the brushed steel, the skyline beyond. All of it suddenly looked what it had always been. Expensive scenery built around words, and words, when read properly, could still bring the whole set to a stop. I'm interested, she said, in discussing reality. Noah laughed once, sharply. You're enjoying this. Mara turned to him, and for the first time that morning, she smiled. Not broadly, not sweetly, not with victory. Just a small, controlled, almost sorrowful curve at the edge of her mouth. The kind of smile a person gives when someone else has mistaken pressure for intelligence for much too long. No, she said. I'm just no longer helping you confuse confidence with ownership. Even Evelyn let the silence sit after that, because some sentences do not need support. They stand on their own and let the room rearrange itself around them. Adrian's phone buzzed again. He glanced down, then lifted his eyes to Evelyn. Council reviewed the archive line, he said. They want an immediate hold on all materials describing the framework as company-owned. Evelyn nodded. Done. Helena sank back in her chair. Darren rubbed at his temple. Noah said nothing now, which might have been the most telling development of the entire morning. Evelyn picked up the NDA one last time, opened it to page 6, and looked at clause 4 with the expression of someone reading a verdict disguised as formatting. Then she closed the document, placed it flat on the polished table, and said the sentence that finally stripped every decorative layer off the room. The company does not own it. Silence. Real silence this time. Not the theatrical kind people use in boardrooms, not the performative kind that waits for the next clever line. This silence had weight. It settled into the cold air, into the leather chairs, into Noah's rigid posture, into Helena's perfect suit, into the glass walls that had watched the whole thing happen. It moved through the room like dark water, finding every crack and stone. Mara picked up her folder. No one tried to stop her. At the door, she paused. Not for effect, not for revenge, just long enough to look back once at the documents, the faces, the expensive room that had been arranged so carefully for her compliance and had instead become a witness stand. Then she said quietly, almost kindly, You should have read page 6. And walked out. Behind her, Orion remained bright, polished, and very suddenly less certain than it had been an hour ago.